So, Ravens flock, we are less than 50 days away from football being back. I'm excited. I'm sure many of you are too, or at least I hope many of you are too. We got many things that we got to talk about in the coming days as training camp begins. But what I wanted to talk about today was actually Marcus Williams. About a day ago, Marcus Williams, he was featured on Terrion, I keep messing up his first name, but Teron Armstead. He was featured on his podcast, The Offensive Lineman. He was very good. He played for the Dolphins, but he recently retired. But he's featured Marcus Williams, and they discussed a few things, mainly what went wrong with the Ravens. Because as we know, 3 years ago, the Baltimore Ravens signed Marcus Williams to a 5-year contract worth $70 million. At the time, he was one of the highest paid safeties in the league. And 3 years into that contract, the Ravens have completely cut ties with him. And Marcus gave his perspective on the situation, which I actually thought was pretty interesting. Now, if you guys remember, it's been a while, so I don't blame people if people forget. I said months ago that I believe Marcus was one of the people on the roster who was overpaid and overrated. And it's not big. I'm not saying I think he's a bad player, but in the time that he was with us, it seems like everything it played out as badly as you could have possibly hoped for. Like, clearly when the Ravens signed him, that was the same offseason where they drafted Kyle Hamilton. I'm sure Eric DeCosta's goal was to have a really dynamic duo at safety, kind of like what they're trying to do now with Malachi Starks and Kyle Hamilton. But back then it was obviously Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams. But Marcus, he got off to a good start. If you remember, that was the Miami Dolphins game where I think he had like 2 or 3 picks in like the first half. He was off to a good start with us, but he gets hurt. He ends up missing most of his first year with us. Then his second year, he comes back, plays well again. He's making plays again, even with, because at one point in the season, he had like one good arm and like one good leg. I can't remember what exactly the injuries were, but either way, he was basically playing with one arm out there and he was still making plays. But again, in and out of the lineup, like he's not at his full strength. And then this year, I mean, as far as I know, he was healthy, or healthy enough at least, and it was just a complete disaster. Like the defense, and it's not just his fault, of course, but at the end of the day, he was noticeably worse this year, giving up major plays to people like a Marcus, like a Jamar Chase, and it didn't make sense what was happening. We still don't know exactly what's happening because Marcus didn't throw anybody under the bus, which I do respect. Like, he doesn't have to say exactly what happened, but he does hint that it may have been some issue that he may have had with the coaching staff, because one thing he pointed out was, well, his words were from the top down, which when you say that, I'm assuming you're talking about the front office and the coaching staff. So he talks about how there wasn't any clear communication on what he was doing wrong. Because one point that he brought up that was a fair point, which is we as fans don't really know what's happening as far as what his assignments were or what the actual scheme was on a given play. Even, again, I'm not somebody who's gonna be breaking down film. I watch film like just for fun or just out of curiosity, but I'm not gonna pretend like I know the ins and outs of everything that's going on defense. And Marcus, when he says that, obviously he's implying that, and Terrion Armstead kind of backed him up by making the same point for the offensive line when he says that, hey, sometimes something can go wrong and it's not your fault, but you're the closest person, and so by default the fans will just blame you. And it makes me wonder, was like, what plays exactly went wrong that weren't his fault? We'll never know. Maybe some of you may go back and rewatch the season to try to figure it out, but ultimately we're not gonna know. But I understand where he's like, as a human, I kind of feel bad for him when he mentions how it was never really communicated what he did wrong by the coaching staff or what he was doing. So he kind of Like he feels kind of out of the loop, and then once they bench him, he's kind of blindsided, and there's really nothing he can do to try to fix it because he doesn't even know what they think he's doing wrong in the first place. But at the same time, he was noticeably bad. So I mean, it is what it is. Now it wasn't just him, of course. Like our entire defense to start the season, specifically our passing defense, it was a complete dumpster fire. Like we were giving up. It didn't matter if you were Joe Burrow or if you were Dak Prescott or if you were Gardner Minshew of all people. We were letting everybody cook us, and I don't think that's just his fault. There were several plays and I've said this a few months ago. The only player on our defense who I think this year truly deserved a Pro Bowl and an All Pro nod was Marlon Humphrey, because Marlon was the only one for most of the season who I felt was really putting it on the line and trying to make plays whenever necessary. Not to say everybody was bad, obviously. Like we have very talented players, but it just seemed like something was very off, and many players on the defense besides just Marcus, like it just seemed like something was just off. And maybe that was a Zach Orr thing. We have to remember that Zach Orr was a rookie defensive coordinator, and it could have simply been a communication issue where Zach maybe didn't know how to really use Marcus, how to really fully make good use of him, and it could still just be Marcus's fault too. But it could be I think it's a combination of things. I think it could be a scenario where Zach Orr and John Harbaugh, because obviously he's the head coach, they may have done a poor job communicating with Marcus on what they feel like he's doing wrong. And Zach Orr, to start the year off, he wasn't doing a good job. Like that's beyond the players. Like Zach Orr wasn't doing well to start off, which you expect from a rookie. We saw the same thing with Mike Macdonald, but by the time the defense started to kind of turn it around towards the end of the year, Marcus was already on the bench. Ardarius fought tooth and nail to get on that starting lineup, and Ardarius deserved to, obviously. When he got a chance to make plays, he made plays, so it is what it is. But one point that he also made that I thought was a very good point was when he said, hey, I've been playing football for a long time, and you don't get that bad overnight, which that is a good point. Now, injuries can affect that, obviously. Like, some players, due to injury or just due to them getting older, they could fall off a cliff, so to speak. But he does have a good point when he says, hey, it's unlikely that he would get that bad that fast, because even though he was hurt the first 2 years, when he did play, he was at least a solid starter. He was at least a solid starter, even if you don't want to say he was worth the money or a Pro Bowl caliber player or whatever. He was at least a solid starter. Once you get into this past year, it just completely went down the toilet. Like he was by far one of the worst safeties in football. So he does have an argument to be made that, hey, it could be just a coaching thing. Either way, it's not up to us to figure it out. I am still curious though, just because it is fascinating to see. It is fascinating to see just how steep of a decline he had last year, and I'm interested to see how he bounces back, where he ends up going. It really won't matter to us ultimately unless he signs with the team in the AFC North, which a lot of our players recently have seemed interested in doing that, like we saw with Patrick Queen. But either way, let me know, do you think Marcus Williams got screwed over by the Ravens coaching staff here, or do you think that him getting benched it's simply his fault? He had his chance and he blew it.